Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Our today's lecture is about science and the branches of science. What is science and what are the branches of science? In this lecture, we are going to study three things, that is science and the history of science and the branches of science. These three things we are going to discuss in this lecture: science and the history of science and the branches of science. These three things we are going to discuss in this lecture. So first of all, what is science? We are going to define what is science. Science is defined as the study of the properties of matter is called as science. The study of the properties of matter is called as science. In science, we study the properties of matter. So science is defined as the study of the properties of matter. Or another definition of science is the knowledge based on observations, experiments, and calculations is called as science. The knowledge based on observations, experiments, and calculations is called as science. In science, we study the properties of matter. And there are two types of properties of matter, that is physical properties and the chemical properties. These are two types of properties of matter. Physical properties are studied in physics and chemical properties are studied in chemistry. So these two types of properties, that is physical properties and chemical properties. In physics, we study physical properties, and in chemistry, we study the chemical properties. Next is history of science. What is history of science? History of science means what was the science initially, and then how it was divided into branches, and then with the passage of time, how it was divided into more and more branches. At the start, the knowledge of science was not much more. There were few things, and the science was studied as a single subject. Science was studied as a single subject, and that single subject was called as the natural philosophy. At that time, there was no physics, no chemistry, no mathematics, no biology, and only one subject was there, that was the natural philosophy. The name of the science initially was the natural philosophy, and at that time, the knowledge of science was not much more. There were few things, and we study the science as a single subject, that is natural philosophy. But with the passage of time, when the knowledge of science was increased, so it was divided into two branches. And this was the first division. This was the first division of science, and the science was divided into two branches, that is medical sciences and the physical sciences. This was the first division of the science. Some people were studying the medical science and some were studying the physical sciences. These were two branches of science. But with the passage of time, when the knowledge of science was increased more and more, then the science was divided into more branches like physics, chemistry, mathematics, electronics, space sciences, and many other branches. So science was divided into many other branches. So this was the history of science, that what was science initially, how it was divided into two branches, and then how it was divided into more and more branches. Now, the branches of science. Science is a very vast field. Science is a very vast field. The knowledge of science is very vast. To make the study of science easy, science is divided into different branches. To make the study of science easy, science is divided into different branches like physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, environmental sciences, electronics, computer, and many other branches. So these are different branches of science, and science is divided into these branches to make the study of science easy. Now I am going to show you my lecture in written form. You can see the written form of my lecture, and all these things will be very clear to you. So three things we are going to study in this lecture. That is science and the history of science and branches of science. These three things we are going to discuss in this lecture. First is science. What is science? Now, first thing is the science and the definition of science, that is study of the properties of matter, is called as science. You can see the definition of science, that is tested knowledge based on observations, experiments and calculations, is called as science. Then in science we study the properties of matter. Both the physical and chemical properties of matter we study in science. And physical properties are studied in physics, and chemical properties are studied in chemistry. Then we have the history of science. What was science initially? Initially, science was called as a natural philosophy, but with the passage of time, the knowledge of science was divided into two branches. That is medical sciences and physical sciences. These are two branches of science. That is medical sciences and physical sciences. These are two branches of science. But with the passage of time, the science was divided into more and more branches. You can see this lecture in written form. Now, the branches of science. Science is a very vast field. To make the study of science easy, it is divided into different branches. Now, the branches of science are what? The physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, electronics, space sciences, and many other branches. So there are many branches of science. Now the tree diagram for the branches of science. The branches of science are clear, are, are shown here by the tree diagram. Now, at the start, the name of the science was the natural philosophy. This is the first name of science. When the knowledge was science was not much more. There were few things the people were studying at that time. The science was studied as single subject, and that single subject is called as natural philosophy. This is the old name of science. When the knowledge of science was increased, then science was divided into two branches, that is physical sciences and medical sciences. This is the first division of science. That is, science was divided into two branches, physical sciences and medical sciences. These are the initially two branches of science. But with the passage of time, when the knowledge of science was increased, then these physical sciences are divided into physics, chemistry, electronics, space sciences, mathematics. So these are different other branches of science. So these are the different branches of science with the passage of time. So this tree diagram shows all the branches of science. So today we have studied science and the history of science and the branches of science. Thank you.